Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestor's breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestor's breath in the voice of the waters. The words come from the Senegalese poet Birago Diop. The music is from Issei Barnwell. She is the renowned singer and former member of Sweet Honey and Maroc, a renowned a cappella group. She started her musical career as the founder of the Jubilee Singers. It's the choir of African American tradition at All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., a Unitarian congregation there. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestor's breath. Now, this is not a sermon about Diop or Barnwell or All Souls, though they all belong in some sense to the great cloud of witnesses that make up its inspiration. Now, this is a sermon about placing ourselves in time. It is a sermon when I remind you that we each only exist because of our ancestors. And it is a sermon in which I invite you to recollect that someday, even if you do not have children, you too will become an ancestor. In truth, there is little more to this sermon than those lines from the French poet Fannin St. In a house that becomes a home, one hands down and another takes up. The heritage of heart and mind, laughter and tears, musings and deeds. Those who have died have never left. The dead have a pact with the living. Some of you might know that since February, my girlfriend Shade and I have been non-resident Community Stories Fellows with the Crossroads Project, a collaborative research initiative housed at Princeton University. In the last months, we've been organizing an effort called Religion in Houston's Pan-African Community. I imagine that some of you are familiar with it. We're investigating the connection between religious practice, particularly non-Christian religious practice, and grassroots Black politics. As part of the project, we are conducting a series of 10 public oral histories with elders connected to the city's 3rd, 4th, and 5th wards. Half of these are taking place at institutions like Texas Southern University and Mount Horeb Baptist Church, and the other half are being held here in our sanctuary. Last week, we interviewed Charlotte Hill O'Neill, a veteran of the Black Panther Party and the wife of Pete O'Neill, one of the last Panthers still living in exile. Next month, we'll be speaking with Bishop Kimothy and Reverend Nalia Nelson of the Pan-African Christian Orthodox Church at the Shrine of the Black Madonna. The conversations have been powerful. If you've missed them, you can find most of them and some supplementary materials on YouTube. Those who have died have never left. The dead are not underneath the earth. In the last several months, we've interviewed John Bunchy Creer, a pillar of the Panther Alumni Network, Bobby Faladay, Ifa and New Orleans voodoo priest, Gladys House L., a civil rights activist, 5th-generation resident of Freedmanstown and Moorish American, Pastor Samuel H. Smith, Sr., who at 94 still serves as the senior minister of the Mount Horeb Baptist Church, and Charlotte Hill O'Neill. It is a varied group. We've learned from our dialogues with its members. We've heard an account of the death of Carl Hampton at the site where he was killed, just at the intersection of Emancipation and McElhenney. He was the founder of the Houston chapter of the Black Panther Party, and his life was ended in a hail of police bullets. We've been to an Ifa divination and been instructed in how to offer sacrifices to the Orisha, the deities of Yoruba, Santeria, Hoodoo, and Voodoo traditions. We've walked Freedmanstown and seen the places where the brick streets are laid out in traditional African patterns. We've heard stories about organizing the Panthers' breakfast program, how they fed children when no one else could or would take on that responsibility, and why their social service prompted FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to claim that they represented the greatest threat to eternal security in the country. You can hiss at that line if you want. Across all of these stories, a common theme has emerged. Everyone has engaged in some form of ancestor worship. They've offered respect and gratitude for those who have gone before, for those whom without they would not be. Christian pastor, Ifa priest, or Panther veteran, each person we have interviewed has spoken with us about the importance of the ancestors. Bobby Faladay eloquently broke it down for us. It's possible that a few of you recall his words. You might have been here when he spoke them, or you may have listened to our recording, or you might recollect that I included a few of them in a sermon last May. If you are familiar with them, they're worth hearing again, and if you're not, I invite you to listen closely. Sade asked Baba about ancestor worship. He responded, "Our ancestors are our connection to the spiritual world." And then he expanded on the practice. People, he said to us, are calling up ancestors, calling up spirits all the time. His words, "You're calling up spirits when you say the name Houston, because it's Sam's last name. You're calling up spirits when you say Austin, because that's Stephen's last name. You're calling up spirits when you look at money and realize that the images are people, not objects, but people. Their names are featured there so that you don't forget them. There is ancestor worship going around you all the time. You are the beginning of your own descendants, but you are the sum total of your ancestors. They are in the rustling trees. They are in the groaning woods. They are in the crying grass. They are in the moaning rocks." I want to pause here and offer you the opportunity to think about your ancestors. There are people and beings to whom each of us owe our existence. All life is related. All life has a common ancestor. When we think of our ancestors, we need not just think of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, on through the generations. We might also consider the profound mystery that is life and the awesome wonder that is evolution. We are made of star stuff, Carl Sagan told us. Imagine your ancestral tree. It began in Africa. Some millions of years ago, the first humans came to consciousness someplace in Africa, children of the first African woman. Before that, we were something like chimpanzees. Before that, similar to a monkey. Before that, a small four-legged terrestrial mammal. And before that, drifting back in time far enough, we will find our ancestors including reptiles, some kind of bony fish bridging the land and the sea, invertebrates, and even eventually single-celled organisms. All life is related. All life shares common ancestry. Every person in this room is a distant cousin. Every person on the planet part of the same great family of all souls. All of us descended from the long-dead celestial orb that burned itself out, burned bright, and in its nuclear death brought into being our own day star and solar system's matter. We Unitarian Universalists promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person and respect for the interdependent web of which we are each a part. Worth and dignity, the interdependent web. These are ways of restating the reality that we are all related. We each come from common ancestors and are made of the same star stuff. The Sante Dakota poet and political activist John Trudell pushed us to remember this in his many writings and performances. More than 20 years ago, I had the pleasure of hearing him at the First Unitarian Universalist Society in San Francisco. There he said words that have stayed with me and challenged me to remember who I am and who you are and how we are grounded on this terrestrial sphere on which our feet are now planted. He said, "We are the shapes of the earth." That is exactly who we are. We are made of the earth. We come out of the earth. Our ancestors are not just the long dead animals from which we are descended. They are the very stuff of the planet, the energy that comes from the sun, the water we drink, the soil, itself a composition of preceding generations, and the rocks and the all that there is. We are but an extension of all being, the universe itself, with consciousness flowering in this moment and casting reflections on the shimmering stars and still stones with words that fall from our tongues. Think upon that as you move through this world. When you respect this muddy planet, you are respecting yourself. And when you disrespect it, they are there in the woman's breast. They are there in the wailing child. They are with us in our homes. They are with us in this crowd. Last weekend, Sade and I found ourselves at the 25th Caravan to the Ancestors. Held each year on Galveston Beach, near where the ships used to bring enslaved people to this continent, it brings together much of Houston's Pan-African community. Participants dress in white, pour libations to the ancestors, drum, dance, pray. After many hours of song and spirit, the event culminates when everyone walks through the door of return and makes an offering to the sea in the hopes of gaining a blessing. The door of return is meant to be the opposite of the door of no return. The door of no return. The phrase might be familiar to a few of you. The door of no return, or more accurately, the doors of no return, were the doors people were forced through when they were taken from Africa onto the slave ships. They sundered cultures, rended families, cleaved communities, and marked the passage from freedom to unfreedom. The door of return symbolically makes all of that whole. It reunites those who walk through it with their ancestors and their cultural heritage. It is an instance of Sankofa, the practice of looking to the past to inform the future, inspired by the Akan people of Ghana. Sankofa. I am a person primarily of European descent. The vast majority of my ancestors left the African continent long before the slave trade forcibly brought enslaved people to Galveston. I doubt that any of my ancestors were on the ships that came into that bay. Yet, standing on Galveston Beach, my sandaled feet in the hot sand, the sun bright, the drums, the steady rhythm of the waves, the odd bird diving down into the water, the pleasure pier, that strange pier stretching out into the ocean, stuffed with last century's gaudy amusements off in the distance, I could not help but think of my ancestors. I remembered my grandparents, Dolores, George, Lorraine, and Maury, all gone. I recalled mentors and friends who are no longer here: Carlos Cortez, Penny Pixler, Federico Arcos, Utah Phillips, Dick and Jane Krause, Kay Jorgensen. Feels good to say their names. I thought of the creators of beauty, the strugglers for justice, the seekers of wisdom who I've never met but who life and work has inspired mine. Theodore Parker, Margaret Fuller, Emma Goldman, John Trudell, Nina Simone, William Ellery Channing, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, Grace Lee Boggs, Kenneth Rexroth, Tina Madati, Ben Fletcher, Margaret Burke White. The list seems infinitely long. Those who have died have never left. The dead have a pact with the living. I could not help but think of my ancestors. As a person of primarily European descent, which is to say that most of my ancestors left Africa millennia ago, I thought of their complicity in slavery and white supremacy. As far as I know, none of my antecedents were directly involved in chattel slavery or the slave trade. I'm a Yankee, and much of my family arrived on this continent in the latter half of the 19th century, after the end of the Civil War. Those that did not settled in places like Iowa, rather than those such as Texas. But some of them definitely participated in the genocide of the continent's indigenous peoples. I know this because on my mother's side, I am related to the infamous Buffalo Bill Cody. Now, I cannot remember the exact relationship, but I know that when I was a child, there was some sort of ongoing dispute amongst some elderly relatives about who could lay claim to some of his guns and one of his pocket watches. There is a football team named after Buffalo Bill. He fought in the Plains Wars during which the federal government brutally sought to steal the land of and subjugate the nations of the Great Plains. He gained his nickname from slaughtering some 4,000 bison over an 18-month period. It was part of a strategy to eliminate the indigenous people's food supply and starve them into submission. Certainly, he's not someone who I'm proud to be connected to, even if he was my great-grandmother's cousin rather than a direct ancestor. Surely his actions are characteristic of that generation of my mother's family. Other relatives of mine certainly engaged in similarly genocidal activities. You are the beginning of your own descendants, but you are the sum total of your ancestors, Bobby Falladay told us some months ago. The sum total of your ancestors. Standing on the Galveston beach, I was reminded of Baba's words. I suspect that honoring the ancestors, all of them, not just some of them, requires at least three things. First, it means recognizing that they have given us things for which we should be grateful. We are charged to pass those things on. You might have your own list, and I invite you to consider it for a moment. For me, they include my love for art, my passion for justice, and my propensity for cooking. Some of my ancestors were part of the Amana colonies in Iowa, a Christian socialist community. One of my great-grandmothers worked in the communal kitchens. Her service was to feed, every day, dozens of other people. I know she loved to prepare food for the people of Amana because my grandmother, Dolores, took great pleasure in doing the same. And my mother got it from her, and I, in my turn, get satisfaction from fixing food for communities I care about. I even use some of their recipes when I do. And if you've come to or gotten food from one of FIRSTUu's holiday meals over the last couple of years, you might be familiar with their peanut brittle. Think for a moment about what you've been given and what you are charged to pass on. The ancestors, Jackie Willis writes, are having a summit. Tomorrow they're having a banquet of possets and pears. They sit on the table. Second, honoring the ancestors means working to heal what has been broken. We are children of all being. We are all related. Each of us a thing of stardust and a member of the great family of all souls. Some of my ancestors did not act in accord to that reality. Some of them were undoubtedly wounded by others who refused to do so. And I suspect that the same is true for you. We honor all of our ancestors, our human and our non-human ancestors, our ancestor, the earth, the water, and the soil, by trying to bind up what has been broken. We honor them by trying to leave a more beautiful world behind. We honor them by recognizing the ways in which we have benefited from the violence of the past. Whether like it or not, I am the beneficiary of systems of white supremacy that my ancestors, like Buffalo Bill Cody, worked to create. And then we work to heal the ongoing scars of that violence. Think for a moment about what has been broken and the work you can do to bring healing and more beauty into the world. What has been broken by the ways in which you might have benefited from or been impacted by violent systems like white supremacy? Or perhaps the traumas that sit within your family? Whatever it is, we honor our ancestors, the sum of all being, by struggling to pass on the best of ourselves and not the worst to those who will come next. When they speak, it is with yellow eyes of a fox and clicks of an orca. Third, we honor our ancestors by recognizing that someday, too, we will join them. That day might arrive soon, or it might be distant, but it will arrive for each of us. At some time in the future, we will all be ancestors. This is even true for those of us who do not have children. Human society is a collective effort. Everyone who is here, brief or long, leaves their imprint on all of us. Years ago, I asked Federico Arcos, who I've told you, some of you about in the past, whether or not he believed in immortality. Federico, you might remember, was a lifelong union member and community organizer. He was a veteran of the Spanish Civil War who had fought against fascists in the 1930s and then been a guerrilla against Franco's government in the 1940s and 50s before finally settling in Canada as an exile. He was something of an atheist, and so my question should have seemed odd. But he had a ready reply. Immortality, he told me, exists in the society we create together. We were driving in a car, and so he pointed to the road in front of us. This highway, he said, offers a kind of immortality for the workers who constructed it. It's their enduring gift to the world and to the people who will come after them. The same is true of the organizations that we create that improve the lot of working people, or the stories we share, or the love we give each other. These things endure, or the imprints of them endure, long after we are gone. We are the descendants of the ancestors. Someday we will be ancestors. Each of us is confronted with the question of what we shall leave behind. One of the reasons why we have a Unitarian Universalist community like this one is to help us answer that question. We consider it in the sanctuary, in our religious education classes, and on our numerous adult programs. Over the next couple of weeks, you are invited to partially answer it by participating in our UU the Vote efforts. Like most of you, I want to leave a more democratic society behind. Democracy is under threat, and it should be left for those of us, or for those who will come next. As a religious community, we have committed to doing something about that threat by getting out the vote and increasing voter participation. We've set the aspirational goal of 100% voter participation in our congregation, and we've adopted Precinct 20, which is a nearby part of 3rd Ward, with a goal of increasing voter turnout there by 10%. I hope that you will join me and other members of the congregation in this effort. I know that quite a few of you already have, that more than 50 of you were involved in registering voters, that our collective effort to contact low propensity voters through postcards generated over 4,000 postcards, and that a dozen of you joined with me yesterday to block walk. There are more opportunities to engage in the coming weeks. You can phone bank, you can block walk after next Sunday service, or again with me on the 8th to get out the vote. We are the descendants of our ancestors. Someday we will be ancestors. Each of us is confronted with the question of what we will leave behind. What is it that each of us is leaving behind? A more democratic society? Something else. In the hopes that we'll leave behind a more beautiful world, I invite the congregation to say, Amen.